With disgust, I admit that my grandmother's death was solely my fault. It's hardly a consolation, yet not a day goes by where I don't want to submerge myself into the soil and be taken by whatever lurks beneath. As luck would have it though, I'm too much of a coward to fulfill that justice. I'll recall it again, if I must, one last time. My duty was simple, painfully so, to drive my grandmother home from the airport after her holiday, to offer some fun conversation, enough to keep her amused. While I waited to leave for this task, I grew fidgety. I had to get a drink in me, and when that happened, it was never one, it was 3 or 4. Dressed in denial, I sat behind the wheel and swore to myself that I was ready to leave and not at all inebriated. It was astonishing that I even made the drive to the airport, where she'd been patiently waiting for me. Amidst my thirst, I had arrived 20 minutes late. Sincerest apologies. Well, I guess there was still some sense in me even after several drinks, because before she'd approach my car, I wound down my window and stuffed gum into my mouth. I won't go into details about the crash and her hideous outcome. Suffice it to say that her arms and legs were demolished. The worst part was that to begin with, I didn't even realize the extent of the damage I caused. What followed was the most foolish act I had ever undertaken. I abandoned the car and walked all the way back to the city, praying that nobody would stop and ask me about the destruction down the road. A fire engine flew past me after about 10 minutes, and I figured it had to have gone up in flames with her inside. Instead of weeping, I chose another beverage, this time from the patrol station. No remorse arose until the day after, when a terrible sickness invaded me and refused to leave, and rightly so. My grandmother didn't leave it at that though, no, and I hadn't expected her to, in truth. Nevertheless, I found myself becoming rather horrified about what might happen, especially when her voice crept through the walls during the early hours of the morning, or she would stream by me and leave a whiff of her scent while I was washing the dishes, forcing me to drop a plate in sheer panic. Despite this, I was never able to see her in the physical sense. Then it got a whole lot worse. One night on my way home from the casino, yes, I'd taken up gambling. I counted the winnings for once in my wallet and cheered to myself. When I crossed the road, I saw behind me some 30 feet or so a strange worm-like human following me. Beneath the street lights, I could see faint wisp of white hair, and the body was well and truly naked. It struggled across the pavement while I tried my best to ignore it, however possible it was to. I could hear it trailing me all the way home, and when I unfastened the gate and hedges on the other side of the road, shook uncontrollably before they froze. I watched, turned around, and walked briskly to the door. That night I stayed up watching television, flicking through the channels. Then I made myself some chicken soup and watched the clock. Whatever that thing was, those wisps of hair, the tattered old body, I will never want to see it again. Here was another dilemma. I wasn't confident that it would be so easy. I stayed up all night thinking that it would bang on my door or try to somehow climb in through the window. I locked every possible lock in the house and checked them all 3 times over. I panted and paced and shrieked at any outside noise. I stood by the curtain, sipping my water from the windowsill, my fingers shaking. It was her. It was my grandmother. It must be. It was around 3 a.m. when I decided to call it a night. I'd been here for hours, fretting away. When I turned to close my bedroom door and finally go to sleep, her limbless body and cold face were there before me. She'd been inside my house the entire time. An awful cry escaped her filthy, toothless mouth, and my whole body turned rigid with fear. As she made her way forward, I bashed on the glass of my bedroom window, climbing up onto the windowsill. The glass shattered and I climbed through, shards digging into my arms and neck. And I tumbled down those slippery tiles all the way to the hard driveway. The wind was more present, I think. However, I didn't feel it, as my arms and legs took me to someplace else. My bones were rattling. The streets were soulless. I didn't know where to go or what to do. All I knew was that I'd never feel safe in my home again.